The age-old question, which at least half of my TF2 Trading Academy members have asked me, I have X amount of keys, should I buy multiple cheap unusuals for profit, or should I buy one expensive unusual to resell? From my own experience, I've regretted buying some expensive unusuals because they took too long to sell and went down in price, while I've also regretted buying some cheaper unusuals because more sellers appeared on the market and undercutted my listings frequently. And to that, there's one situational direct answer alongside some trade-offs, which is simply the profit margin percentage. Whichever gives you a greater return on investment percentage-wise is the best answer. When you realize this, you just make more profit because you tune into frequencies of buying deals that are objectively more profitable. And if you're interested in joining TF2 Trading Academy, which provides you with all the information and services needed to make a huge amount of profit, the link is at the top of the description. Although profit margin percentage is the most important factor, let's go over some other things you need to consider to make this work to maximize your profits. Number 1, profit margin percentage. I often get asked by people to price check the items, but they only look for unusuals that are, for example, only 100 plus keys or 50 plus keys, and ignore everything else below a certain threshold because more expensive items equals more profit. But this isn't true. What purely matters is profit margin percentage. If I bought a 100 key hat with a 20% profit margin, I make 20 keys profit after selling. If I bought 6 different hats, collectively worth 100 keys with an average profit margin of 30%, I make 30 keys after selling them all. Regardless of how I spent my keys, the profit margin percentage is extremely important in yielding the greatest returns. I experienced this mistake last year as I bought a Demon Flame Brown Bomber for 1700 keys off of another trader just because I kind of wanted a nice Halloween unusual to play with and thought I could take my time flipping it to use up my keys. 4 months after purchasing, I finally ended up selling it for 1878 keys, which profited me 178 keys. That sounds good initially, but the math tells a different story. That's only a profit margin percentage of 10.47% after 4 months. This profit margin percentage number is calculated through the formula selling price divided by buying price times 100% minus 100%. So here I did 1878 keys divided by 1700 keys, which equals 1.1047. Times 100% is 110.47%, minus 100% is 10.47% profit margin percentage. But if I spent the initial 1700 keys on various items between 15 to 30% profit margin, I would be making probably around double the profit in the same time frame. And as I sold some stuff, I could have bought even more items to resell in the same 4-month window as opposed to just sitting on the Demon Flame Brown Bomber. However, the reverse can be true as I bought a Dark Blaze Kapos Kappa for 775 keys and it was completely worth it as opposed to buying multiple cheap items. In less than 3 months, I sold it for 1111 keys, which is a profit margin percentage of 43.35%, which would be much higher than the high end of 30% profit margin spread across multiple items. So it's really important to consider the profit margin percentage when comparing which items to make profit off. It doesn't matter if it's cheap or expensive, just choose the most profitable one percentage-wise. But let's assume the profit margin percentage is the exact same across cheap and expensive unusuals. Let me explain some advantages and disadvantages of both, which will help you determine which one is right for you. Number 2, cheap unusuals liquidity. One major advantage the cheap unusuals have over more expensive unusuals is your liquidity. Your liquidity just means how many keys you have on hand to spend on profitable deals. The problem with expensive unusuals is that all of your pure is locked onto 1 or 2 items and you really can't do anything else but wait. But if you instead bought 20 cheap unusuals, there's a very good chance that one of them will sell really quickly, which lets you buy another cheap item. And you can continue the cycle of buying and selling, which keeps trading fresh and motivating. And you may even yield a bit more profit than expensive unusuals because if you account both to be at the same profit margin percentage, you just get more trades in. Number 3, expensive unusuals enjoyment. The major advantage expensive unusuals have over cheap unusuals is of course they are far more aesthetic and fun to play with. You feel like an absolute boss roaming around in your expensive hat, and this makes it very easy to keep long term. But with cheap unusuals, sure you can equip them in multiple classes, but they are quite ugly. But as to saying that, it's really all up to your preference. Personally, I don't play the game that often anymore, so I just keep 1 or 2 nice unusuals in my backpack for keeps, which is significantly less than my inventory value, which is solely used for trading and making profit. I've genuinely tried buying some items to keep, but I always end up selling them because I tend to get bored of them really quickly. For instance, I've tried to buy an Australian professional killstreak grenade launcher and sticky bomb launcher, but I sold them in a few days. I've tried to keep a Galactic Gateway Hephaestus's handcraft for my scout loadout for MVM, but I also got bored of that after weeks. Even that Demon Flame Brown Bomber that I intended to keep for months, I quickly wanted to resell because I just get bored easily. But if you really like playing with expensive unusuals, that may be the better choice in comparison to cheaper unusuals with the same profit margin percentage. Just know your values and preferences before making a financial decision. Number 4. Cheap unusual undercutting. A flaw of buying multiple cheap unusuals is that they often have more supply, and you can have less control over the amount of sellers competing with you. And that's likely what makes them cheap in the first place. Whether it's a very commonly unboxed crate, or it's a case hat with a case effect, supply not only dwindles the price but increases your competition. Although I believe that in most cases you shouldn't, other people are going to inevitably undercut you, which can be frustrating and lose you some profit. So don't be afraid of getting undercut, since there's many things you can do to control it, but be aware that it's more common amongst cheap unusuals than it is on expensive unusuals, which tend to be lower in supply and competition. Number 5. Expensive unusual dryness. Even though expensive unusuals are highly aesthetic, they tend to really not get any good offers even in the long term. This is because of their high price tag, in which most players simply cannot afford what you have to offer to the market, and the ones that can just don't want it bad enough. For instance, I have an Arcana's Prancer's Pride listed for 1200 keys. I've had people ask me what I've been offered, but after 3 months, no one has actually offered me anything. Not even one lowball. So again, even though you shouldn't be afraid of this as long as you control for profit margin percentage and other common market factors, just be aware that more expensive unusuals have the tendency to just sit on the classifieds for a while without much attention, especially when you get into god tiers like mine. If it feels like your items sit on the classifieds for too long, I always recommend just discounting it bit by bit every 2 to 3 weeks until you receive an offer worth looking at. Number 6. Middle tier unusuals. So the argument was always between cheap and expensive unusuals, but what about something in the middle, between let's say 20 keys to 100 keys? Well, to that, I'd just say that the profit margin percentage is still 100% applicable, and the pros and cons I just discussed for cheap and expensive unusuals kind of just neutralizes. But I would also say that middle tier unusuals have the highest tendency for inflation, so just be aware of that when you're looking around for something to resell. The rise of Gladiator.tf bots in the last few years has really ramped up the buy orders on many hats, and then have the tendency to collapse out of nowhere, which can really screw you over. And that's all I have to say on the debate between cheap versus expensive unusuals. Know that the profit margin percentage is the most important thing, and consider the trade-offs when profit margin percentage is the same. If you're interested in joining TF2 Trading Academy, where I'm running a challenge for new members to make 100 keys profit in 90 days, check out the link in the top of the description, and also make sure to join our free Discord server. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. I'll catch you next time. See ya!